I am Mark Roithmare. I have the privilege of serving as the CEO of the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation. Welcome to the 15th Annual Scientific Symposium and Luncheon. This is both a poignant and an opportune time. Opportune, for the first time, we have 2 new treatments on the market that are actually doing something about Alzheimer's. Additionally, it seems like almost every other day we're hearing about new and approved blood tests that are out there. We're also hearing every day a new, renewed focus on prevention and precision prevention. And then last but not least, we're hearing about, or we're going to be hearing about, new novel targets. There's a big study that's going to come out in about a month or so we're going to prep you for all of that too. That is the opportune. The poignant, since last year, and actually since this past June, our founder, a wonderful co-founder, Leonard Lauder, passed in June. And I will tell you, Howard and I have the privilege of spending a lot of time with Leonard over the past year. And one of the great things about Leonard, and I think, actually, Howard, I think it was at this event probably 13 years ago, he coined the phrase, "Hope is on the horizon." Mm-hmm. And he assured Howard and I that he left this earth knowing hope was finally here. And so that was pretty great. So we'll hear more about Leonard a little later today, but right now we're going to focus on the brilliant panel we have up here today. One of the things, first of all, the one and only Dr. Howard Fillit, half century of working on this, right, Howard? A half century working on this. And now the science is finally moving at warp speed. The remainder of the panel is something incredibly unique. And who's been to this luncheon before? Yeah. So can you believe that we are now at a point when you saw all that preclinical science and all the hope that Howard would keep saying, oh, it's just a touch away. And now we have representatives from the 3 main pharma that are actually bringing treatments to market. How terrific is that, right? Yeah. So Howard, I'm not going to have you introduce yourself, but I'm going to go down the line, and Sarah, starting with you, ask just your introduction, what your day job is, and then Howard, as always, we're going to come back to you for the first question of the day. So, Sarah, start us off.
Sarah Kleinpeter. I work for Biogen as our Global Head of Alzheimer's Disease and Dementias, and I spend my day looking at the next research modalities the whole way up to bringing medicines to market. And it's been an exciting collaboration with our partners at AZI to be able to bring one of the first and second drug disease-modifying treatments to the market.
Laura.
I'm Laura Steele. I'm the Senior Vice President for Neuroscience at Eli Lilly, and I spend my days focused on how do we bring the innovative science that gets FDA approval to patients across the U.S.
And I am Sarah Foster. I'm the Executive Director of Cytocare and Health Systems Management at ASI. And I spend my days partnering with physicians and health systems across the U.S., helping them operationalize these therapies on the market.
Now, Howard, I know better than to ask you publicly how you spend your days, but I'll do as a little bit of a warm-up. Howard, I remember back in 2017, 2018, with failures that kept going on in the market for Alzheimer's, Stat News did an interview with Howard, and the headline on the interview is, "The only scientist left in America who is still optimistic about Alzheimer's treatment." And if you go back at that, sometime we have to put that up on a screen, because you had like 4 or 5 predictions, which was everything from there'd be a blood test in the next couple of years to one of these monoclonal antibody approaches was going to work. And it's all come true. Howard, 50 years of doing this, and now the science seems to be coming at warp speed. First of all, how do you view all that from your perspective?
It's fascinating to be in it for the long run, because I do remember the days when we practically knew nothing about Alzheimer's disease. I remember going to medical school and never hearing about Alzheimer's disease, never writing the diagnosis on any patient during my training. So we've come a long way from literally almost nothing to a point where Alzheimer's disease enters the mainstream of clinical care and clinical research, and we have proof of concept. We have drugs on the market that are disease-modifying drugs. I never thought there'd be a blood test for Alzheimer's. We just didn't have the technology. So it's really a tremendous shift in the way we think about Alzheimer's disease today than we did back then.
Howard, do you see in the last couple of years, was there a seminal moment? Has this been building for years? What gives?
The seminal moment in my mind was when Robert Butler, who was one of our first board members when we were still a private foundation, he and Mary Lasker, who started the Lasker Prize for her husband and so on, they went to Congress and said, we need to establish the National Institute on Aging in 1975, after Bob had written a book. He was a physician, but he also was a journalist, and had written a book called Aging in America, Why Survive, which was the first time that the coming epidemic, or end, whatever you want to call it, of Alzheimer's disease was happening. And he got Congress to approve not only the National Institute on Aging, but that the National Institute on Aging would be the primary driver of Alzheimer's research in Washington. And I'll just say, just to give you an example of what was going on then, when he got to the NIH as first director of the National Institute on Aging, he did a survey of how government was spending money on research, and he found that during this time of the war on cancer and the war on heart disease, billions of dollars being spent for those diseases, we as a nation spent $625,000, a few $100,000 on Alzheimer's research. Today, the Alzheimer's research at the NIH is closer to $4 billion. And that's made tremendous difference. We've been able to harvest all of that basic research that was funded at that time and through decades into therapeutics. And this is how it works. There was a study once that showed that from the time of a basic research breakthrough or finding to the time that a drug ultimately comes to market on that breakthrough is somewhere about 30, 35 years. And so today we're sitting here right on time for the fact that we broke through on beta amyloid. Beta amyloid was discovered in the plaques in 1984. So, we just are really, it's a very exciting time, and I think the future is very exciting. And I could keep going, Mark, but I think I should stop.
Well, good. After all this time, we read each other very well, right? So that was great, Howard. Laura Steele, I want to come to you because part of what's happened now is we can diagnose Alzheimer's, and before even symptoms show. Can you talk about the importance of the PET scan as well as kind of the evolution of the blood test?
Sure. So the PET scan, I think if we just kind of step back from a patient pathway standpoint, we looked across medical claims from 2021 through 2024 to really understand when a patient presents with symptoms, and so they're starting to recognize, like, I think I'm having memory issues, and they present to primary care, what actually happens next. And so what we found is there are around 6.5 million patients who start in primary care and are telling their primary care physicians, I noticed that something is different in my memory. What we find from the claims data shows that only 15% of those patients actually make it to a specialist. And then from there, 95% of them don't receive an advanced diagnostic, which is essentially a PET scan. Why is that important? PET scans and lumbar punctures, so CSFs, are really the way to diagnose patients right now with Alzheimer's disease. And there's an urgency component to that because the earlier you can diagnose a patient, the earlier you can unlock potential treatments that exist. Why we're excited about the blood tests that have received FDA approval are when you think about cost to the system, when you think about scalability, and then when you think about the health inequalities and disparities that exist across the nation, blood tests are the way really to unlock access for all. And so when you imagine a world of like what would good look like, what good would look like or great would look like is that a patient anywhere in America, even in a rural community, an underserved community, could go see their primary care physician. That primary care physician could order a blood test that then gets sent into a major reference lab to read that and screen it and have confirmatory diagnostic there that the patient does have Alzheimer's and then could prioritize treatment in a way. So blood tests really are the way to allow patients across the nation to have access to diagnostics.
And a couple of ADDF interjections into all of that. The PET scan was something that Howard took a phone call about 15 to 20 years ago with a professor out of U of Penn with a crazy idea. Howard funded it. That crazy idea got rolled out into a company. That company got bought by a big pharma company. Those PET scans, at the ADDF, we can see how well these new treatments are getting rolled out by the use of the PET scan, because we still to this day see a residual on that. And then for those of you who might not have been here before, ADDF, we're a venture philanthropy. We don't give out grants to scientists. We have contracts, whether it's an academic or whether it's a biotech. If there's any return on investment they see, we get a percentage of that, put it right back into the science, which was a good thing because that led to us investing in blood tests. And we have a representative from C2N, which has one of the best blood tests that's out here with us today, Joni. And there was an idea that Howard funded out of WashU that got spun out into a company, so you can see the model in action. Howard, I'm going to come back to you, and then the two Sarahs, I'm going to feed it to you. But Howard, you know, we always heard in the past, matter of fact, 5 years ago, we'd be in a room like this, and we'd be talking, and we'd inevitably get somebody come up to the mic and say, why would I want to know? There's nothing I can do about it. But now, Howard, there are these two monoclonal antibody drugs that are out there that can do something about it. Can you talk about the two drugs and what exactly they do?
Right, so we have the plaques and tangles that were seen by Dr. Alzheimer in 1906. And then in 1984, we discovered the plaques are made out of beta amyloid, this protein that misfolded and was toxic to brain cells. And so what the monoclonal antibodies do is they bind to the plaques, to the beta amyloid, and then at the other end of these monoclonal antibodies is the working end that says to the cells that eat the plaques and get rid of them, here's something we got to get rid of. It's called immune surveillance. And these microglial cells, which are the ones that eat the plaques, are targeted to the plaques. They eat the plaques and they get rid of them. So I think many of us will never forget sitting in Nice, France, at one of the international meetings for the first time. Must have been Lilly, I guess. I'm not sure which company it was at this point. Showed a picture with the brain scan of patients at the beginning of the trial, and the PET scan was positive. Patients had all their plaques. You could see them in living people. You didn't have to go to autopsy. And then after treatment, the brain scans were normal. And everybody was aghast, like, oh my God, how could you do that? It was like really a sentinel moment in the field. So, you know, we can say, I think at the ADDF with some pride and humility, that we funded this technology 25 years ago that led to the first positive disease-modifying trial in a phase 3 study, and ultimately the first approval of a disease-modifying drug for Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah. Howard, just a follow-up to that, because you do see patients, so just give people a feel for these two drugs.
Yeah, you know, I like to say somewhat, I think we try to relate to telling the story of efficacy in a way that people can understand, and also safety in a way that people can understand, and put it into context. And the way I try to do it is, you know, when we see these cancer drugs being advertised on the nightly news, we see all these happy people that are just like, this is the wonderful thing. And if you try to read the small print, it says, you know, the drugs were this much efficacious in reducing, you know, progression-free survival by 5 months or something like that. And then the next screen, you can barely read what it says. It says side effects from these drugs include death and, you know, really serious side effects. And I personally, when I put the monoclonal antibodies in that perspective, the monoclonal antibodies are actually better than a lot of cancer drugs. And we've been fighting this battle with patients and with physicians and so on, that there's ageism. You know, we don't consider Alzheimer's generally, people don't see the end stage. Most people have never been in a nursing home seeing hundreds of people that, you know, had productive lives, famous people, writers, and so on, who now are bedridden, can't toilet themselves, can't feed themselves, can't speak. And we don't consider that as serious an illness in some way as we do cancer. And maybe it's the mortality issue, but I think that we know that Alzheimer's is a chronic, progressive, and uniformly fatal illness. And so the fact that we have drugs today that can add, I think there's many ways to present the results of the trials, but I find the most understandable way is the what we call time to event model, where we say, how long would it take for somebody to progress from the earliest stages of the disease, mild cognitive impairment, to the first dementia stage, which is mild dementia. And these drugs extend that in about 50% of people, extend that time towards a point where people are much more functionally impaired. And that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. And the safety of the drugs, again, I think is we've learned how to manage the safety issues.
Yeah. And it's administered how?
So right now, the drugs are administered intravenously. People have to go for infusions. You're talking about, 80-year-old people that have to get into the infusion center and sit there, and there's side effects, and they have to get 5 MRIs during the first 3 months to make sure that people don't get the hemorrhage or the edema that can be seen on an MRI. But what I think is really exciting in the field is that the companies that have these drugs are now moving to subcutaneous.
Hold that thought. Because I want to ask the two Sarahs.
Hey, they're good.
So these are IVs now. For monoclonal antibody, the drugs, what comes next in their development? So who wants to go first?
I'll let you go.
Oh, sure. So I think it's very exciting that we have these first disease-modifying treatments and that we have FDA approval to use them in mild cognitive impairment and mild dementia. And the next indication or wave is actually in the pre-symptomatic or preclinical space. I think we all believe that we want a timely and accurate diagnosis for Alzheimer's disease, and so it will be really really important for the field that we understand how these anti-amyloid treatments help prevent and also stop the accumulation of plaque. So with our partners at AZI, we are studying an anti-amyloid treatment in a study called AHEAD 345, and we look forward to seeing how these medicines perform in that pre-symptomatic population.
Yeah, and I would just say, simply stated, we have to get to this disease state earlier, right? Laura gave the example of these patients raising their hand, presenting in a PCP office. Then do they get an advanced diagnostic? Do they get to a specialist? But all of that takes time. And too often do we see patients that finally get a diagnosis and they're too late for these current therapies to really make an impact. So when we think about what's next for this class and other classes to come in combination therapies, it's to get to these patients earlier. So we need patients to be able to raise their hand and recognize that there's something going on. We need them to be heard at the PCP's office. We need PCPs to have easy and accessible tools to be able to diagnose. And then we need to be able to get them on therapy easier and faster. That's where this market needs to go.
Yeah. Howard, fill in on where you were going with subcutaneous.
Well, I think that as we're evolving these treatment modalities, which are monoclonal antibodies requiring an infusion, we're trying to see what the next step is. And I think one of the advances has been lowering the initial dose to ameliorate the side effects in some ways. And the other thing is translating these infusions into a subcutaneous EpiPen type of technology, which people use all the time in the U.S. For administering drugs. So there's kind of EpiPen type technologies for the administration of these monoclonals. People can do it at home on whatever frequency turns out to be the best. And I think this way we'll have more uptake and safety and understanding the efficacy of the new modalities. But ultimately, I think especially prevention, where you're going to have widespread use, and they have to be very safe, that we're going to need that little white pill. And if it's Ozempic, whatever the little white pill is, that's going to be, I think, the way to prevention. I can't imagine tens of millions of people that might have literally plaque in their brain, the pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic, going on infusions. It's too expensive. We can't afford it. It's too much to do. The benefit clinically won't be seen. I think it'll be hard for patients to stay compliant. So I think the next era will definitely be some sort of little white pill. That's the goal.
All right. I want to come back to the diagnostic a little bit, then we're going to expand to prevention, and then we're going to go farther than that. Laura, we've been hearing, feels like every other month, that one or more of these blood tests are now getting FDA approval. What's the importance of that? And then how do you see these blood tests actually interacting at the primary care physician level?
Sure. So there's so much excitement right now about the blood biomarkers that are receiving FDA approval. So one recently approved from Fuji Rabio is really focused within the specialty care setting for patients 50 and older who are showing cognitive symptoms. I talked a little bit earlier about how those can help unlock like an early diagnostic without having to send all of these patients for PET scans to confirm. And so we see it being used really as like a triaging or a screening tool. And what you're seeing as a result is then the PET scan positivity rate is in like the mid to high 90s as a result of getting the right patients to the confirmatory advanced diagnostic. The other blood biomarker that's been recently approved in a collaboration with Roche and Lilly focuses more on the primary care setting. Now, this is not used as a current diagnostic tool, but it allows primary care physicians to order a blood test to really understand, are the cognitive symptoms that the patient is experiencing related to Alzheimer's or not? And so think of it more as like a screen in, screen out. And why that's important in primary care. I think many across the nation believe that primary care physicians don't have any interest in helping patients with Alzheimer's, and that's actually not what we have seen. I think there's been a little bit of, okay, why diagnose if there are no treatments available? I think a lot of what we hear from primary care physicians too is like, tell me what I need to do and where I need to focus for these patients, and then where can I send them? So really what you feel this energy on in primary care and where the blood tests are helping is if a patient presents with cognitive impairment or starts to say, I think I'm having memory issues, you want a primary care physician to do some type of cognitive assessment and then leverage the blood biomarker that's available so that they have an understanding of where is this patient actually falling, and is this patient a good candidate then to send to a specialist? Because right now our specialists, who are very well equipped to treat and diagnose these patients, the backlogs that exist from a capacity standpoint in our healthcare systems, I mean, they're vast. It depends on where you are in the country. It could be a good scenario would be 3 months. We know a lot of our top institutions across the nation, if you're a patient who's trying to get in and see an Alzheimer's specialist, it could take anywhere from 6 months onward, 12 plus. And the important thing with the treatments that are available is urgency matters. And so you have certain patients across the nation who are actually missing their window for treatment because they can't get in to see a specialist to receive an official diagnosis and actually have a treatment. So we keep going back to urgency and access, and that's really where these new blood biomarkers help unlock that for patients.
Yeah, and at the ADDF, we have a saying, with ADDF, we only do one thing. We fund science, it's translational science. How can we go from bench to bedside? It's maniacal, the way we look at this. But we believe the following: science leads regulation, leads reimbursement. Mm-hmm. And the more we can push the science, now the FDA says, well, we've got a PET scan, but these blood tests can do this, so shouldn't we be looking at the blood tests? About a year and a half ago, for the first time after Howard used to beat his head against the wall with Congress and others about the PET scan wasn't reimbursable. Now it is to get on one of these new drugs. The next thing you're going to be hearing about more blood tests getting approved by the FDA, and that will create the pressure for the regulators to say, CMS to say, we're now going to reimburse for this. And it makes sense, right? Because a PET scan, Howard, would cost about how much?
$8,000.
And a blood test?
Somewhere between $500 and $1,200.
Yeah, so and then you start getting scale, right? That comes on top of that, so something to look forward to. I want to shift to prevention, and the two Sarahs and ultimately Howard, and I think Mia's here, so we're gonna have some folks talk about it. We're talks about prevention, right? And there's all this great stuff you can talk about prevention. First of all, we have these monoclonal antibodies, so can you go earlier with them, right? Then we talk about prevention. We know there's lifestyle changes that we can do for all of this, right? And then there's some combination of all of that that could be put together, and I know I'm leaving stuff out of prevention. So let's start, Sarah, with you. Prevention writ large, how do you look at it?
It's a tremendous opportunity, again, for the class to be able to move even earlier in these asymptomatic patients. When I told you a little bit about what my day-to-day was, it's spending time with HCPs and health systems, getting them ready to operationalize these therapies. But it's still a challenge. Every day is still a challenge for these patients, even though they are symptomatic. So I look at this in a way of a care pathway or infrastructure. How do we develop a care pathway and these tools like blood-based biomarkers, digital assessments that are coming to market to start to enable these patients to say, well, I may not have symptoms, but there could be something going on. And so these screening tools are going to be really, really important. And then drugs getting earlier before symptoms even appear is going to be the key to really unlock the future in this class.
Very good. And I think the path to prevention, I think, looks different depending, I think, on the perspective that you take. So we just talked about the recent improvements or approvals with the blood test, which is absolutely transformative in the Alzheimer's space for the decades of the science that's been going on. And so those tests right now are, as referred to by Laura, rule out and rule in. And so the blood tests that you're going to see in terms of scientific evolution over the coming years are going to continue to evolve. And the most simple way I can say is that I believe, will evolve to a brain health panel similar to what you get as a cholesterol check at your primary care on an annual visit. And so right now the blood tests are testing for amyloid positivity, but there will be a need for scientific discovery across multiple modalities. At Biogen, we actually have a collaboration with Fuji Arabia and Beckman Coulter looking at tau blood-based biomarkers, and the other modalities or pathophysiologies that make up the complexity of this disease. Those things together will actually become that brain health panel that you'll get at the primary care. The reason why I mention that in the state of prevention is the only way to be able to get to what we'll call, you'll hear referred to as prevention, pre-symptomatic, or preclinical, is that we have to be able to identify the disease before it manifests into symptoms. And that means it's going to have a biological footprint, which means it can be detected by blood and potentially, hopefully, by digital means. And so what I see is an intersection point forming between our digital ability to maybe look at our speech over a longitudinal period that gives a physician even more data, together with blood to identify the right patient at the right time with the right intervention. Now, I'm going to take a double click on the intervention part because this could come in the means of different pathways. And so Mia probably will be great to come in and add to this, but there are going to be non-pharmacological interventions and pharmacological interventions. So the earlier that we can get your blood footprint of how your risk factors and how your blood is presenting in terms of that mixed pathology of the disease, it's going to be able to help your physician understand which intervention is going to be best for you. And I think with the finger studies that have continued to evolve over time, this is going to give you a mix of how you can intervene both with lifestyle intervention, but also with the right treatment at the right time. And we'll probably get into the complexity of what's going to happen in the next 10 years, but once we have the building blocks of different types of treatment for Alzheimer's disease, you'll start to see those become available in combination therapies and also sequenced based on where you are in your disease. So it's a really exciting time. Hoping we can do this in the next decade, but I might be ambitious.
Well, I think speed on, Godspeed, right?
Godspeed.
Howard, just to give people a feel, when we talk about lifestyle changes that are preventative of cognitive decline, what are we talking about there?
Well, exercise actually turns out to be, I think, one of the most effective interventions that we can have. And sedentary lifestyle is actually a risk factor for dementia in older people. We don't know exactly how exercise works. It's not kind of the simplistic blood flow. We funded a study about 25 years ago on looking at just people taking a brisk walk, because we wanted to know, does it work and how does it work? And I think of the 14 or so risk factors, which we could go through, that are manageable lifestyle risk factors, exercise, I think, is one of the most impactful and something that people can do. The study we funded was very simple. You take maybe, I think it was 50, 75-year-olds, send them to an exercise physiology clinic. They go out for a brisk walk for 45 minutes 3 times a week, come back. And in the beginning of the study, we did a brain MRI to look at their brain volumes, and we did psychometric testing to look at their memory and so on. And then after 6 months, just not any other time points, one at the beginning, one at the end, people who took the 45-minute brisk walk had a slowing of the rate of atrophy of the brain shrinkage over that period of time, and had a stabilization of their memory, essentially. Whereas the people who didn't take the walk had findings on their brain MRI shrinkage and their neuropsychometrics that we used to consider consistent with normal aging. And that was, I think, one of the first really interventional trials showing that prevention can work. Now it's a multimodal type of approach: diet, managing depression, hypertension, diabetes, hearing loss, vision loss, don't smoke, don't drink alcohol, and I'm sure I'm leaving out a few. I think the challenge and the beauty of the finger approach was that this was all done. Implementation is the key factor. We know what the risk factors are now. We've tried to get people to exercise, and finally, after decades and decades, people are exercising, and that's had an impact on heart disease. And I think we're seeing the same impact on the incidence, not the prevalence, but the incidence of dementia, because there are people that are entering into these clinics. We're seeing an explosion, I think, not just in the US, but in other parts of the world, of brain health clinics. Because now that we know what the risk factors are, how do we get people to do it? That's the challenge.
All right, well, I'd like to add to this by saying we're going to stop the panel right now. Everybody, let's go for a brisk walk outside, right? That we do. Where is Mia? Mia, do you mind if I get you into this conversation? And if you just want to go to the mic. Mia, so we're hearing about prevention, we're hearing about treatments, and we're hearing about maybe it's a combination of the two. And so for those of you who don't know, Mia Kivipelto, the top Alzheimer's prevention scientist in the world. She joins us from Stockholm, Sweden today. Her PhD thesis was on the prevention of Alzheimer's, which all proved to be true. So, Mia?
Thank you, and thank you for the panel for wonderful discussion. I really think the multi-domain concept is there. It's not enough, or what we learned from the finger study, there is no single solution that is enough to solve the complex Alzheimer's disease. So we need to combine, we need to target several risk factors and mechanisms at the same time. And the finger model, which you mentioned, I'm very happy that we are now in 72 countries. And we will learn so much. We are further adapting, optimizing the model. One size does not fit all. We really need to have this adaptation. And the future, I think, is really the combination. We can combine lifestyle and different type of treatments, and the precision prevention, combination treatments, so that we are tailoring the interventions based on the risk profiles. If it's the risk factors or the genetics or different biomarkers, I think we have the tools now available. And I'm very excited and very grateful for the support from ADDF that we are now running the first large-scale combination trial called MedFinger, where we are enriching the at-risk persons with ApoE4. We know ApoE4 is the most important genetic risk factor. So we are combining finger and metformin as the repurposed drugs, and the trial is going very well. We have now recruited almost 600 participants. And I think we can use it as the model for the next generation of clinical trials. We can test different type of medications. I would really love to combine finger with anti-amyloid treatments and see if we can get even more benefit and maybe less side effects. So that's where we are, and that makes me so excited for the future.
Really, I often say Mia is the only person I know that's more enthusiastic than I am. So you can Mia, just quickly, because some people might have not heard, fingers.
Yes, I think, Howard, you mentioned almost all the fingers, but we can have a small repetition. So first, we know now that 45% of all dementias are linked to modifiable risk factors. factors. It is a lot. So it's not only high age and genetics. So 45%. Finger model, it's easy to remember because it's like 1 hand and 5 fingers. It's the physical activity, and I agree, that's probably the most powerful medication we have for the brain health. Second one is healthy diet. Brain needs a lot of nutrients throughout the whole life course, and especially when we start to have some memory issues. So nutrition is really, really important. Third one is cognitive training. Brain needs some exercise, and I think the session today is excellent way to keep the brain active, so that's what it is. Fourth one, social activity, but also relaxation. We are living in a quite stressful society. Brain needs activity, but brain also needs some rest, and sleep is one of those what I think many of us need to think maybe a bit more. And the final one, taking care of all vascular metabolic risk factors. High blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, what is good for the heart is good for the brain. So activate all 5 fingers. And one more good thing, it's never too early, it's never too late. We have been showing that the same model works for individuals who have early Alzheimer's disease, and that's really what I think the implementation gap, we should really work to try to implement it.
Phenomenal.
Thank you.
Phenomenal. Quick check, how much time? Yeah. How are we on time? One more round of questions, and then we're going to go. Okay, so we're going to do one more round of questions for our panel, and then please, with folks with questions, we want to take your questions so you can line up. And we're at either mic, and we're very fulsome here. So let's take that into this concept of combination therapies. We tell Howard, all of us who work with him daily, that he's a genius because 40 plus years ago, he figured that Alzheimer's was multifactorial. It's a biology of aging. We all age differently, and we're going to have to approach it that way. And ultimately, this was going to be about prevention, combined therapies, precision medicine. Turns out, he was right, which is good. So, Laura, I want to start with you, and we'll go to our to both Sarahs also. Thinking about combination therapy, how do you think about it?
So I think we think about it in a couple ways. I think one, you think about the presence of amyloid and tau, which Howard had mentioned earlier, and how you need to be able to visually see those. So think through like the advanced diagnostics we've been talking about. So a PET scan, a CSF, a blood biomarker. And as you can better understand the biomarkers that present for patients, how do you think through different treatments that target amyloid and tau at the same time? And could you have a better outcome for patients? So I think that's how we're thinking through combination therapy. Obviously, incretins are a hot topic right now. We believe in the science and the potential impact and the human benefit that patients have, and how that natural occurring hormone really impacts multiple systems throughout the body. So we're watching that closely as well. So I think there are multiple combination therapies and options for the future.
Okay. Which Sarah wants to take this next? Beyond amyloid and tau, do you see it? What do you think?
So I think, so incretins were mentioned, so I'll make that more specific. So we'll see the GLP-1 readout in the coming days and weeks. So just checking the date here. And I think it'll be really exciting to understand if there is a potential for incretins or GLP-1s to activate in the neurodegenerative pathways, and whether or not that's going to add to the potential combinations of the future. We do know that, anti-amyloids and anti-tau treatments are the most progressed, but there are a lot other modalities that are out there that we need to understand in the tauopathies and in the dementias, and also considering the ApoE4 risk factors. And so I think you're going to hear a lot about amyloid and tau because that's the most progressed, but there is a lot of research coming behind that just in some years that's going to help give us more of the building blocks. The other thing that you might hear also talked about is something called the concept of brain shuttle, which has been trademarked by Roche. And this is the ability basically to transport a medicine like a taxi cab directly into your brain. And the thought is that by passing the vascular system, you can decrease the risk of ARIA and have a more efficacious outcome. We don't know whether that science is going to tell us. We'll find out later this year at a meeting called CTAD. So I think, to me, the building blocks in the next 6 to 12 months could become quite clear on what could create the future of combination therapies, but they're also knowing that the science in this particular disease area is very tough. We might not get all the building blocks we want and need to progress to other modalities and co-pathologies. But there are a lot of really smart scientists working on all of this to make this come to life.
Sarah?
Yeah, I go back to what Laura said, understanding what a patient's biomarkers are telling you, whether it's amyloid burden or tau burden, and then how you can approach that with either a single therapy, a combination therapy, preventive therapies. It reminds me a bit about oncology, where it was 15 years ago and where it is now. Personalized medicine in the AD space, I think, is not too far in the future for us.
I have so much to say here, and I know you're smiling at me, Laura. First of all, if folks want to start lining up, please do. But Howard, I'm going to land this last part with you, and there's a little bit of a buildup. Number one, this GLP-1 study, right? So these are the weight loss drugs we've all been hearing about. We will all be in San Diego together first week in December, and Novo Nordisk will be reading out its phase 3 trial. I bring all that up because I come back to our guy, Howard. So 5-10 years ago, he seeded a phase 1 and phase 2 trial out of Imperial College in London, taking the component of the compound semaglutide and putting it to see if it could have effect on cognition. And those of you who know the ADDF, we exist to take it out of the lab, get it into phase 1, is it safe? Get it into phase 2, is there any kind of engagement? And there was engagement, but it was not a high-powered study. And I don't know where we were, Howard, at one of the big international meetings, but the folks from Novo wanted to meet with us, and they met with us. And they were asking Howard about the study we had funded and what the results they were seeing. And the reason why they wanted to meet with us is because they knew they were about to roll out the phase 3 study. So they were taking what Howard had done with Imperial College and now rolling it out to a big phase 3. And the aha for us, and I remember Howard saying at the moment, yeah, these weight loss drugs must be coming, because Novo was the first to market with the weight loss drug, saying that must be coming to market because now they're looking for other ways to use the drug. And I think that snapshot is everything that the ADDF is about. That's one. Two, we hear about all these biomarkers. And those of you who've been with us in the past, we have a wonderful relationship with Bill Gates and others on the panel here. Something called the Diagnostic Accelerator. Round 1 or phase 1 of that was all about, could there be a blood test? And that program got started after the top person in the field on blood-based biomarkers had said, I don't think there can be. And the DXA proved that came through, particularly the p-tau217, that yes, it could. So that was number one. Number two, the second round of this, we've moved more into digital. And there is something called the Speech Consortium that we fund, literally 8 different clinical trial sites looking at people's speech patterns with early cognitive issues because it can be predictive, right, to go. And when you think about this, well, you can take a blood test and see if you have the plaques, but some people don't have plaques and have cognitive issues. So this is where the digital becomes really important really early on that we can do it. The last piece I'll give you, because we'll also be hearing in another month, there is going to be a Diagnostic Accelerator 3. There's another, of course, the 3 iterations of this is $150 million that Bill Gates and Leonard Lauder kicked off and brought in a lot of other donors too. And that's going to look at 3 things. One, it's going to look at biomarkers about the complexity of the disease. It's not just Alzheimer's, but Alzheimer's and related dementias, and what are the differences? It's also going to look about the pathways of aging, inflammation, vascular, mitochondrial, right? Because my friends from industry on the panel, they're not quite talking about that part as much. And Howard, I'm going to come to you with a question on that in a second. And the third part of it, again, is the digital and particularly AI. And it's wonderful because with the Gates partnership, we challenge each other in this partnership. We challenge the Gates folks that it's the heterogeneity of the disease. We need to do more about that. They challenge us on everything's going to AI. We need to do more of this. So it's a wonderful, very strong partnership. But Howard, when I listen to my friends from industry, and I mean that, our friends from industry, you know, you look at, I don't know, 5, 10 years ago, right? 75, 80% of all the clinical trials out there, they were on amyloid and tau. But now, when we look at all the clinical trials out there, what's the percentage of amyloid tau versus the other pathways of aging?
It's shifted completely in the other direction. So now 75% of the drugs in clinical development are on non-amyloid, non-tau programs. So, we've seen that these drugs work, the monoclonals. They slow the rate of decline by about 30%. But we realize now that we're going to need combination therapy on other mechanisms to get to 70% or 80% or 100% slowing of the disease, and that could lead to prevention where we delay the onset of symptoms, which I think is ultimately the goal. And to model that, several years ago, there was a modeling study that looked at what would happen if we delayed the onset of Alzheimer's disease by 5 years. We would reduce the number of cases of Alzheimer's disease by about 50%. So I've thought that's an achievable goal for us. We're going to need combination therapy. We need to learn from cancer. It's precision biomarkers, precision treatments, combination therapy. A lot of cancer patients have to be on 3, 4, sometimes even 5 drugs to stop their cancer. And neurodegeneration kind of ironically parallels cancer in many ways in terms of the pathway. Sometimes they just go in opposite directions. So I think it's a very exciting time because now we're going to the next step, which is inflammation. And it really is, we're seeing out of that 75% that's non-amyloid, non-tau, the most prevalent investments right now are going into inflammation drugs, about 25%. And we have a number of interesting programs, which I could talk about, in terms of how we're addressing inflammation in the brain that's stimulated by either the plaques themselves. In fact, when you look at the drawings that Alzheimer made in 1906, he drew the plaques, but they were all surrounded by inflammatory cells. And here it is more than 120 years later, and we're just starting to get into, well, maybe that's a therapeutic target.
Yeah. So a couple of things with that. Number one, what you're hearing today, and those of you who've been with us, 10 years ago, Howard saying there's going to be a blood test, and there would have been a panel of people up here saying, this is crazy, right? And then I remember when the first monoclonals were starting to break through, and there was a bit of controversy on it. And Howard was the one person who just kept looking at the science saying, there's something here. There is just something here. And I do that because today's ADDF is bolder, right? We've learned from this, and quite frankly, from Howard's vision, oh no, this is combination therapies. Oh no, inflammation, vascular, mitochondrial, these are all part of it, right? And so that when you think about the monies that you give to us, and that 100% of it, because of the Lauder family, goes directly to scientists working on these non-amyloid, non-tau clinical trials, we are again seeding the future, pushing the future that's on this. The other thing I will say, and then please, we want to start taking questions, but the other piece, several of us had fortunate enough in early August, we were out in Seattle with Bill Gates, 20 of us, talking about this diagnostic accelerator, and this is a direct quote from him. We went from the blood to the speech consortium, and now we're looking at the heterogeneity, we're looking at the biomarkers for the biology of aging, the pathways. And his quote, he got the last, like today, Howard's going to get the last word at that meeting, Bill got the last word. And his last word was, I started with modest expectations of this project. They've become very high expectations. All of this is clearing my highest expectations, and what I'm most excited about is what comes next, and that's exactly what Howard's talking about here, so kind of cool, which is good. All right, we want questions from you all, so please, we know we have questions, yeah.
Hi there. I'm Bonnie Pfeiffer Evans. I'm on the Board of Governors. And first, I'd like to applaud all of you and thank you so much for all that you do. It's amazing. And Mark made me promise that I would not ask a complicated question. So I will not. It's going to be simple. And it's for all of you, and maybe it's for Joni. Where can I get the blood test? It used to be not legal in New York. Is it legal in New York yet?
It was always legal, it's just that the FDA hadn't, I mean, the New York State, let me back up. The FDA approves it, but then the states have to approve it to get it on the market and get it paid for. So, ironically, these blood tests, which are really the result of advanced technology, more than anything else in terms of being sensitive to being able to detect one molecule among millions of molecules. The blood tests are approved in 49 states, including C2N, which has been, through a bake-off, shown to be the best blood test, right? And the C2N test is approved in 49 states. There's one state that hasn't approved these blood tests for Alzheimer's disease, and it's New York. But you can get it. Quest and LabCorp both make these tests available through subsidiaries, and they farm it out and so on. And in some cases, they're doing it in their own labs. So the test is available. I can write a prescription for it. And people can get it, yes. People can get the blood test. Whether they have to pay for it or not is, I think, another question.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Please.
I'm Ira Goodman. I'm Chief Medical Officer at CytRx, and I had a question about the blood-based biomarkers. It's strictly semantic, but the FDA tends to clear devices, not approve them. And does that give any wiggle room to private payers to say, well, it's not an FDA-approved test, we're not going to pay for it?
Yeah, I mean, we were trying to get the brain scan paid for. I mean, this was revolutionary. You could make a definitive diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease in a living patient, whereas before it was either spinal fluid or an autopsy. And most of my patients didn't want to go to autopsy to get a definitive diagnosis. So what was happening is that people had to pay out of pocket, basically, and at the time it was $8,000. And Medicare wouldn't approve payment for it because they said there's nothing, why bother, because there's nothing you can do about it. And that's true for almost every test we order in medicine. Why bother if there's nothing you can do about it? That kind of makes sense, I think, in some ways. But in other ways it doesn't, because I think patients with Alzheimer's deserve a definitive diagnosis. It increases the cohort of patients in the community who might be eligible for clinical trials. And now that we have monoclonal antibodies on the market, that argument that there's nothing you can do about it is gone. So I think we're going to see the payers already paying for the blood tests. And I think it's going to be a big change in the way we take care of people.
Thanks.
And we expect that reimbursement to come in early 26 from a Medicare standpoint. I think the private payers are a different story, especially when it's commercial related, as you know. But I think a lot of our efforts right now with CMS is focused on, and Mark and I go back and forth with this, there's so much excitement around the innovation that's coming from a scientific standpoint. We've shared that every day we wake up and our job is the healthcare system isn't matching the speed of the innovation of science. And so how do you get the healthcare systems to start to recognize the science and the innovation that's coming and say you cannot wait for approval of these? You have to start mapping out the pathways and the blueprints for patients today, and start resourcing for that, et cetera. And so we're focused on with CMS too. Right now, if you look at the registry for some of the potential treatments that are available, you've got PET, you've got CSF, and then you've got this other bucket. We're saying stop calling that the other bucket, because in certain pockets of the country, you're actually allowing the p-tau217 to be used to then diagnose patients and then ultimately reimburse for potential treatment. So why is that box so vague for everyone? Name what that box is.
Yeah.
And so all of our effort is really focused on how do we make that happen to provide clarity, that there's reimbursement there, and then also that reimbursement can carry through for potential treatment options. But then you start to see a different belief and behavior exist within the healthcare professional community too, knowing that there's clarity that you can use those and your patients can get them. So there's a lot of effort, I think, across the industry on how do we make that happen altogether.
the data is so strong for the blood-based biomarkers. I'm surprised the FDA just doesn't approve it.
Right. So there's, I'm going to stay with this again. Science leads regulation, leads reimbursement, and this point about CMS, again, we only do science, but the belief is, from the ADF point of view, that with CMS approval, and to that point, you know, I think early 26, and it even could be 25, I will tell you the ADDF already has a press release written for that moment, that it comes seriously because it is such a big moment. But I think that is then going to create the pressure. If CMS is paying for it, then private payers, the demand is there, right? People are going to say, I want to know, because whether it's prevention, whether it's these new drugs coming to market, we now can do something about it. So,
Thank you.
Good. Howard?
You know, I think, you know, CMS has to consider some of the economic issues here. And, you know, a lot of the reason why primary care doctors, for example, historically haven't wanted to make the diagnosis is because then quality care involves education and counseling, which can take an hour.
Right.
And, you know, you're coming home with $30 an hour, you know, so they don't want to get involved. They'll just maybe write, now maybe they'll write for the blood test,
Correct.
but that's about it. And I think economically, CMS needs early diagnosis because, you know, we showed this, I did a fair amount of pharmacoeconomic research when I was doing something else. But if these people that have problems with scheduling and financial management and medication management early in the disease are generating excess healthcare costs because they're ending up in the hospital because, like my father had diabetes for 30 years, and when he started getting cognitive impairment, he started getting up in the middle of the night thinking that he forgot to take his insulin, and he'd go at 2 o'clock in the morning into the refrigerator, take his insulin, and by 7 o'clock in the morning, he was unconscious and going to the hospital.
Yeah.
And the hospital costs are, you know, the primary driver of excess costs in Medicare. So, you know, we've seen modeling economics that making an early diagnosis not only makes sense from a quality of care point of view, but also from a healthcare economic point of view.
Yeah. Good. Great. Thank you. Next, please.
Thank you. My name is Jackie Williams. This is a rather personal question. So my husband died 5 years ago of early onset Alzheimer's at 69. I have 3 sons, 40, 38, and 36. At the time that he was diagnosed, everyone said, don't, you know, don't do anything. There's nothing you can do. Diet and exercise we've heard about. We know that about pretty much every disease. Some of my boys are better at that than others, but they're young, and they're young fathers, and their aunts and uncles, 2 of them were tested for the apogene and carry 1. What would you suggest that they do at this age? You're talking about the blood test, but it sounds like it's more when you're showing first signs. What do you do besides diet and exercise at that age? And what hope? I mean, I know you're talking about 10 years. 10 years, it's a long time. Any free advice?
I think getting into clinical trials is one thing people can do. Getting some of these innovative drugs and seeing if you can. A phase 3 clinical trial in Alzheimer's disease costs somewhere between $200 and $400 million. And we need usually 2 phase 3 trials to get a regulatory approval. But half the cost of that is in trying to find the patients. So, you know, we historically have had to screen 10 patients to find 1 that's eligible for a particular trial. So I think getting involved in the trials for a cohort, and maybe looking at the genetics of your family and in some of this.
There was no, that we know of.
Right.
And certainly not early onset. So when you say get into a clinical trial, you know, they don't have any symptoms at this point, or that we're aware of. How difficult is that to do?
Well, I think getting into, you're hearing a little bit about some of these prevention trials that are going on in people that don't have symptoms. Well, what I'm not hearing is whether or not, you know, how your family members were diagnosed. Did they have the blood test or a spinal tap or that showed that they had amyloid? Because then they would be eligible for some of the prevention trials.
Well,
Any-
they were told that with one apogene, it was not, so if it was if you had the two, that you was something that you were concerned about. So they were basically told the two that had it, go home, don't worry, eat well and exercise. So,
Yeah. Well, for people that have two, who are homozygotes, that have two E4s, there are a couple of gene therapy programs that we could talk about. But if you just have one, it's true that the risk is not that much greater. It is greater, but it's not that much. But clearly you have a family history here that's pretty scary, I'm sure.
well, you say that. One person, is that a family history?
Actually, yes, if you have one sibling or parent or grandparent, a first-degree relative that has the disease, then your risk goes up something like 3 or 4 or 5 times. So that's pretty significant.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody from industry wants to add to anything Howard said?
I think it's tricky to answer from an industry standpoint on that one. I feel for you though, because my dad has it. And so when you think about not worrying, I mean, you're worried every day. You're worried about the person who has it. You're worried about your mom who's taking care of your dad. You're worried about yourself, your sister, et cetera. And so I think you've given amazing advice. I would follow the science extremely closely because, like we said, the science across the industry and across institutions, all the research is focused on early and ultimately the goal of prevention. We're not there yet, but the science is all headed there and focused that way. And so I mean, I'm obsessed with it. It's also my job. So I think some days that's a good thing. Other days I'm like, oh boy, I need another job. There's a lot here to focus on. But I think that obsession and just staying really close to it, I think hopefully will guide you down a path.
Martha, please. Would you-
I have a brother-in-law, if you can hear me, who has the same thing. I too have a brother-in-law who has the same sort of thing. Should I suggest to his 3 children, who are all in their 30s and 40s, to have the blood test to begin there?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think the blood test hasn't been widely available, and it would be kind of an off-label use of the blood test, in fact. But a doctor, I could prescribe it for someone that has no symptoms, and Quest will do it, and it'll get paid for one way or another. And yes, then you would find out if there's an active, you wouldn't have to do the brain scan, for example.
Right.
And you would find out if the person has an active Alzheimer's type pathology with this new test, p-tau217, and these various ratios that are being used. And I think having that, it's not only having the definitive diagnosis, but we do know that the disease starts about 20 years before symptoms occur. And if the average age of symptoms is 75, let's say, then we know the disease starts in the 50s, when people are in their 50s, in terms of really starting to see the pathology. We don't know a lot about how the test behaves in people that are 20 years, in their 50s. We don't know how that works yet, but I think
it's best to find it early or to do anything preventative, correct?
Well, in terms of lifestyle, like somebody said.
Right. No, seeing how many, tau or plaques are on the brain after having the PET scan.
Right, and then it's like, should I get an angiogram of my heart blood vessels at age 55 when I know both my parents died of heart disease, right? And I have a high cholesterol. Would you get the angiogram at 50? Probably not, but would you treat the cholesterol? Yes, you would.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of analogies with the way we're looking at heart disease and even other
Both
illnesses.
the grandparents as well had the genes, and then my brother-in-law got it. So the hope that his children won't, but the fact is that it's there.
Yeah, and this is
at a higher rate.
prevention is definitely the next frontier for our work. There's no doubt about it. And maybe if the GLP-1s show efficacy, and we know there's metabolic disturbances with aging, this is our framework from the biology of aging. We're looking at aging is clearly the leading risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, far and away. So if we can chip away at that, let's say the GLP-1, the Ozempics work, then maybe what we should do, because we don't know, it's not just people that have diabetes now. We're talking about people that have risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. Should we be treating them with GLP-1 agonists even before they get the monoclonals when they have symptoms? And that's kind of a paradigm that I think is the next era of how we're going to be looking at this illness.
Again, just a quick check. Anybody on the industry side, anything you want to add to that? I have a piece I will add. You think about it today, if you have heart disease in your family And think about a number of people here who are on statins. And if you go out to the future, you're 40 years old, and this is the future, but 40 years old, you can get a blood test to see that might this possibly be in your life. You know there are things you can do on lifestyle that can push this out 40%. You know now that there are treatments that can be there along the way. This is where we're going to be. And the tough part about right now is, okay, we're just, like, this is now becoming possible, right? So how do you navigate that space? Do we have time for more question? One or two more questions? Then there we go.
Awesome. Hi, folks. My name is Dr. Nadia Safraz. I'm from the Milken Institute Science Philanthropy Accelerator.
Yeah.
There were two threads mentioned on stage today, which I want to just tie together and pick your brains on a little bit. Biomarkers and diagnostics and digital biomarkers, and then also harnessing data that maybe we're not looking at. And so oftentimes we live in this world now where every quality assurance call you call is recording your voice. All of these passive ways of collecting data, the way you swipe on your phone, it's all these sort of things that we're starting to understand, but the data's messy. Is there ways for us to be considering how we're mining that data, how we're looking at it, how we're correlating it to even electrical health records, identifying patients for clinical trials through using EHR? I'd sort of love to understand what all of you are thinking and how you're thinking about that.
I want to ask a quick question because I want to see, is Melissa Lee in the room? She's one of the scientists who's running a project. Melissa, would you mind coming up and just answering from what exactly the Speech Consortium is doing right now? Because kind of like Mia, we have somebody who's running an incredible program, and Dr. Lee's part of the Howard's scientific staff at the ADDF.
Sure, so thank you for asking that, because that is my favorite question to get at any of these events. Because we at the ADDF really do believe in speech as holding a lot of potential for predicting future cognitive decline or detecting cognitive decline early. And so we run a program called SpeechGX. It's our speech consortium, in which we know that the technological advances, especially in recent years, are there. We have the ability to be able to mine this data, but we need to have the data, we need to have the infrastructure. And so what we at the ADDF, I think in 2021, so 4 or 5 years ago at this point, decided to do was that we would put together that data for the community. And so we are running a 3-year longitudinal study across 9 clinical sites in the US, Spain, and Australia, with 2005 participants, gathering their speech data on a quarterly basis for that 3-year period of time, along with their blood biomarker data, their MRIs, neuropsych characterizations. And we just finished enrollment at the end of last month, actually, so 2005 participants officially in the study. And we are making that data available to partners to come in and use that. And our first partner that has come in this year is Siemens Healthineers to come in and use that data to build these digital biomarkers that can do things like detect cognitive as early as possible and even predict future cognitive decline.
Thank you, Melissa. And Howard, how would you see that used in the healthcare system?
Well, you think of speech, it's just speech. But speech is a product of the mind. It's a direct reflection of your mind. So it's really interesting because, we've all seen people in their preclinical phases that they talk funny. I mean, the vocabulary is reduced, concepts are not as well expressed, and the parameters that we're using in the speech consortium are really driven by research on speech with aging and with Alzheimer's disease. And so, Melissa, I'm sure you could address this better than I, but we're making this very, very valuable data set available to anyone in the world who wants to use it, especially industry. And you mentioned Siemens, which is a huge company, obviously, is already licensed the data. So it is part of our venture philanthropy model. But how would you use it? Well, let's say I'm a manager of a managed care organization, and I have 300,000 members in 4 or 5 regional markets, and they're signing up now, and I want to do the welcome call. But I want to know that I'm getting valid information at the welcome call from somebody who's cognitively intact, right? I can't say, hey, by the way, are you demented? I can't say that. So, but I can analyze their speech, and I can tell. So, or if I'm managing, again, somebody like my father who, was a brilliant man, but, lost his abilities. If he's on the phone with his managed care case manager, and the case manager is saying, well, here's what you got to do to manage your diabetes. You got to eat a diet, you got to take your insulin, you got to take your metformin. And my father's going to say, yeah, I can do that. Okay, fine, no problem. Because the case manager has no way of knowing if the person he or she is talking to is cognitively impaired. And this kind of way of detecting cognitive impairment is very efficient. And it could even be a screening instrument for getting people into clinical trials. So I think it's going to be a breakthrough. And we need to get something, again, that's inexpensive, sensitive, and basically accurate. And I think speech qualifies as one of, might be at the top of that pyramid. And then from there, the evaluation flows.
All right. So thank you. Thank you, Melissa. And just a special shout out to our friends from the Milken Institute. Several years ago when Mike Milken first met Howard, he said to us, it isn't that there isn't enough capital to cure for Alzheimer's, it's just the capital's not focused in the right places. And that became Mike Milken's real interest in working with the ADDF, which has been a wonderful partnership, so thank you. Okay, so I get the pleasure, last questions. This is rapid fire, and to our wonderful person in the front row who was brave enough to talk about her own family situation, I think you're going to appreciate these questions. And this I haven't previewed with anybody before. And Howard, you're not going to get this question, but you're going to get to talk last, okay? So, which is good. And Sarah, I'm going to start with you at the end. And each question is going to be a little bit different. But they're all based on the same year. It's 2035. I am, at that point, I will be 75 years old. Sarah, can you start it off? What can I expect if my cognition starts to go a little bit fuzzy?
Yeah, well, I think
2035.
2035, it's hard to think about that. But I think if your cognition is a little fuzzy at 2035, hopefully at that point you have tests that are available to be able to show you that there's changes going on in your brain before you even knew that your cognition was a little fuzzy in 2035. That's where we're headed. That's where the science is headed. And so hopefully it doesn't take you raising your hand, but instead you're doing some type of screening test at home that shows you that there's changes going on in your body, and you can take the appropriate course.
Okay. Laura, it's 2045. My 30-year-old adult children now are in their 50s. What can they expect?
Well, I hope that we've prevented it from occurring, and so they're not worried about that. But I think when, just to build off Sarah's comment, and I mentioned earlier, we followed the claims data of Alzheimer's patients, and starting in primary care, how many get to a specialist, how many get an advanced diagnostic, and how many eventually get on treatment. When you think about these blood biomarkers and the innovation, one thing that we keep talking about is how do you take out one of the steps in the patient pathway to really streamline care? You start to see that you have a family history, or you start to recognize that you have cognition issues. You get that blood test, hopefully at home, big brain panel, and then you immediately move to treatment if you're positive. I mean, you could take a 17-month journey. You could make that happen in less than a month. So I hope that's what we're talking about in 20 years, and so much more.
I love it. Sarah, the most difficult question for you is, it's 2065.
Oh my goodness.
40 years from now, and my most beautiful little grandchildren, they're now in their 40s. What can they expect?
So when I think of this question, I hope we get there before 40 years from now. I actually think it's possible, is that Alzheimer's disease is not a disease. It's actually a very manageable chronic condition, and that you'll start to get screened at probably the age of 45 at your PCP's office. You might have also been able to opt in on your Apple or Google phone to track your voice over some years, and it's already telling you to go to the doctor and maybe have some more advanced screening. And at that time, we'll have precision or personalized medicine available. And depending on your family risk history and depending on how your brain health, your cholesterol-like panel tells you, you will know what lifestyle intervention with the 5 fingers you need to deploy and when you need to deploy it, and if you need to take something to stop the aggregation of the disease. And so I use HIV because in 25 years that went from something that was deadly to something that was very manageable, and I think this is very possible here.
Which is great, fabulous. Howard, I have 2 questions for you. First of all, sitting on this stage with rival representatives from 3 different pharmas and biotechs here together, all focused on one mission, how does that make you feel?
You know, people have told me that the Alzheimer's field is different. How is that? Because we collaborate. And no one organization can do everything in terms of what needs to be done to get effective drugs. So the venture philanthropy, ADDF, plays a role in taking on early risk in biotechs. We've contracted with over 150 biotechs in the last 27 years. And pharma can't do everything. I mean, pharma, believe it or not, actually has limited budgets also. And sometimes things that are too risky are not done. So we have an ecosystem that needs to work together. And we've partnered with Novo Nordisk in the first Ozempic trial. It was liraglutide, actually. We've partnered with many organizations. I remember Leonard saying once, you know, even though they're, you know, obviously a very wealthy family, ADDF can't do it alone. And, you know, if you look at a lot of the advances that have been made, we've had, in some way or another, we've had an impact on that. And it started with the brain scan, which has impacted so many different aspects of the field: prevention, treatment, early diagnosis in the clinic, and so on. So I think in 2065, or whenever the year is, that we'll continue to see that sort of collaboration, because it's a natural.
Yeah. First of all, can we have a round of applause for all of our panelists, particularly our pharma panelists? Howard, last one, just because it's fun. You went to medical school, they called it senility. They didn't even call it Alzheimer's. We sit here today with blood tests and treatments, and speed is, we've got wind in our sails. How's that feel?
Senility was thought to be a normal part of aging. Well, that's how I learned it. You know, people got senile, you know. The first time I ever saw a patient that was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease was in 1980. I got a tour of a nursing home. At that time, very, very few doctors ever went into a nursing home. And certainly during clinical training and in medical school, you just didn't do it. So you didn't see what this disease ultimately does to people. And I think it was really the pioneers in the very early days that said, you know, senility is, well, actually, can I tell one quick one? No.
Quick, Howard, quick.
No, I'll tell you.
You're between people and food.
Blessed, Tomlinson, and Roth were 3 pathologists working in London in the late 60s. And in 1968, they published a paper that was replicated in 1970, which was called something like Observations on a Cohort of Ill. And so they took 50, 75-year-olds at autopsy who were labeled as being senile, and they autopsied their brain and stained them with the same dyes that Alzheimer had stained with in 1906. And it turned out that the people who were senile had plaques and tangles. And that was the first time that happened, 1970. And the people who were not senile didn't have plaques and tangles. So it was on that day in human history that senility went from being thought of as a normal part of old age and aging to being recognized as Alzheimer's disease.
So I'm amazed here, right, and listening to that, where Howard was, he came into this, senility was just a normal part of aging. To Sarah, what you said, we can now envision the day that Alzheimer's is a treatable disease. Right, that condition, right, goes from disease, so from senility to a condition. Pretty cool, pretty cool. For our panelists,